Okay, we're just gonna get started here. Looks like we have a small group today, which is awesome. That means you guys get more specific coaching, basically. Um, where's everybody from? I'm just curious if everybody found me on Meetup or if they found me. If you found me on Meetup, are you in Vegas? You just typed that in the chat. I'm just curious. Uh, I'm just go over some ground rules for a second. First of all, I'm recording. The goal of this is to have just like something I could put on, say, YouTube or a podcast or something like that. So I just want to remind people to check your anonymity, make sure that you're not using full names, things like that. And also, when you share, don't overshare. Don't share to something that too private that you wouldn't want online, basically. So thank you for that. You're free to take screenshots. None of this material is a secret. This is all from my book, which is now a good time to talk, how to ask for what you want and get it. It's 10 years in the making, so I'm pretty excited about it. Uh, Everything we do here today is going to be optional. And what that means is you can pass on anything. If you end up in the hot seat, you can say no thank you for things. It's nothing is required or anything like that. I wanted to take a moment to give a trigger warning. If we're talking about communication, odds are we're talking about a lot of unhealthy communication. Um, and unhealthy communication can become abusive communication very quickly. So, just trigger warning, traumas, abusive behaviors, and things like that, like they might come up and they're all real and feelings are valid. So, be kind to yourself and thank you for taking care of yourself. If you need to take a space or anything like that, that's totally cool. Don't worry about it. Um, be respectful to yourself and others. And with this, I just want to say we have a lot of negative self talk that sometimes is in our inner dialogue. And in the hot seat, I might call it out. I'm going to be gentle. I'm not going to be telling anyone what they should or shouldn't do. But it will be something that will be surfaced. And from there, if someone's interested in hearing more about it or getting feedback or getting ideas, I'm cool with that. But we're not going to be pushing anybody and we're not going to be shooting on anybody. So if it's okay if everyone is on a different place in their journey. What's interesting is you'll see that someone's in a different place than you, and you'll say, "Oh yeah, I see what they should do." And it's kind of funny how it's always easier to see it in everybody else. um, I'm going to remind people to be respectful of everyone's time, and with responses, just limit yourself to like a 10-second quick response, or if we're having a deeper conversation or question, maybe about a minute. So, and as part of that, I also want to throw in there that I am not a licensed therapist or anything like that, and I'm not pretending to be. I'm a communications coach. Everything that I have is basically from many relationships doing it wrong. I was stuck in codependency for a while. I also had a few actual abusive relationships, and it put me down a whole path of discovering that I knew nothing about these things because no one ever taught me as a kid. And it turns out my parents didn't know either. And I spent, I'd say, about $30,000 on workshops and audiobooks and programs and all sorts of stuff like that to get all this information. And once I got all this information, I started piecing it together from different spots and kind of crammed it together. And that's where this whole book came from. I basically had somebody say to me, "Oh, the best thing for a relationship is more communication." And I jumped on that. And I said, "No, I don't think so." Because a type of communication could be yelling. You want more yelling in your relationship? And it led to a whole conversation of what does healthy and unhealthy communication look like? And how can we have more healthy communication? Which is something we're actually going to talk about today. So moving on. Uh, Raise your hand, or if you're muted, you can go ahead and say me in the chat. Uh, Raise your hand if you've ever been in an argument with someone that you care about. Like you care about their feelings, you care about their opinion, yet here you are arguing with them. I'm definitely been there. Raise your hand if you have ever said things you regretted in the heat of the moment. Raise your hand if you've shared your thoughts and feelings with someone that you love, and that person somehow negated your thoughts and feelings or dismissed them, or somehow you got silenced. Raise your hand if you have stopped sharing many of your thoughts and your feelings with a loved one because that one loved one has made you feel silenced or invalidated. Sometimes we get to a point where we don't even bother anymore. It's like, well, based on how terrible our conversations went last time, why would I tell you this time? It's kind of a difficult place to be, especially if it's your primary relationship. Here's a good one. Raise your hand if you have a hard time saying the word no. That's for the people pleasers. And raise your hand if you have an extra hard time saying no to the people that you love. I'm so guilty of that one. That's where a lot of my codependency and a lot of my struggle with abusive relationships came from. Was it was difficult to say no when I should have been. So I'm just going to start with a quick overview. Um, in my book, I outline the whole process of how do you ask for what you want and get it. And it's all about how do you ask in healthy ways. And it's broke down into four major parts. One, we get clear with ourselves. Then we create a safe space to have a conversation in. And then we actually have the conversation. So three, you're having the words, and the words that we use are called holding space. And we hold space for each other. We take turns. And lastly, we agree to do something about all the stuff we just talked about or do nothing. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of detail on those. So when we're getting clear with ourselves, two main things we're going to look at is what am I feeling and who am I blaming for those feelings? It's pretty amazing that most feelings we experience go straight to blaming somebody else for them. Also, what do I actually need and who am I blaming for that lack of the need? Our mind does a lot of emotional acrobatics, logical BS that tries to make it everyone else's fault when we're unhappy. And we label a lot of blame as feelings when they're actually not. So there's a lot involved with this first step. In fact, this is probably about 100 pages in the book because there's a lot to talk about there. I'm going to go into all that over the upcoming weeks. Actually, most of October is going to be dedicated to this first step, getting clear with ourselves. Next, we have creating a safe space to talk. And that's kind of surprising. Not everybody has experienced what a safe space feels like. In fact, I didn't experience one until I was 30 something. But to get there, we're going to start with, is now a good time to talk? Is now a good time for me? Am I in the right spot? Is now a good time for you? Are you in the right spot? Also, where are our emotions at? Where are we in the right place? Are we standing in a busy intersection in the middle of the street? Is this the right time? Is it now a good time to talk? Or should we be finding a better spot? As part of creating a safe space to talk, you want to maintain the safe space, which is something there's a lot involved with how to create and maintain a safe space. Again, I'm going to have a few videos on that. One thing to think about when you say, is now a good time to talk? Do you and I have the tools to be able to have this discussion? Because sometimes we just don't. I mean, if you think back to maybe a few relationships that you just don't have anymore, and you think back to the time it went wrong, maybe you just didn't have the tools to talk about it back then. And you did everything you could, but without all the tools, it just turned into an argument, just turned into escalation, and it turned into maybe not talking to each other anymore. So sometimes you need to realize I can't have create a safe space here because we don't have the tools yet, but you could go find them. For three, holding safe space for each other, I just want to clarify that holding space is a whole process. And again, I've got a lot of weeks that I'm going to dedicate to going through that. But it is the opposite of debating or arguing. When you get this right, when it really clicks, you'll never have an argument again because there's no need to. You can very gently just tell people, "Oh, I'm sorry. I maybe I didn't let you know, but I don't participate in arguments. I don't participate in debates. I hold space for people who hold space for me. And if you'd like to do that, I'm all in. Let's make it happen. But if you want to argue, I'm gonna have to excuse myself from this." And it's kind of amazing that you can actually do that. I know a lot of this might sound like ridiculously best case scenario, like or a blue sky scenario, but it's true. It takes time, it takes practice. There's a lot of details involved, but once you get them, you can literally excuse yourself from arguments. In fact, I highly recommend it. And it's one of the first things we're going to learn in the upcoming weeks. Number 4, agree to something or nothing. And there's a lot involved with this, including an apology probably in there. But I like to play a game called Everyone Wins or No Deal. And it's pretty simple. The rules are everyone wins or no deal. And with that approach, it's no longer an argument. You can get out what you need, they can get out what they need, and you can say to each other, okay, can we do this in a way where everyone wins? Because if we can't, there's no deal here. And we'll both go our own ways and find someone who can help us get our needs fulfilled. So, and it's nice to treat it like a game because it's less serious that way. But this is an overview of what a healthy conversation can look like. Again, there's a lot involved in there. It's a very high level, but it is possible. So knowing all this, this is, well, actually, I got one more slide. There you go. This is what I'm referring to when I say safe-ask culture. So in a safe-ask culture, anyone would feel safe to ask a question, knowing that they were not going to be attacked, they were going to be heard, and it wasn't going to turn into an argument. At the same time, in a safe-ask culture, someone would feel safe being asked something and not feeling like they were forced to be nice or forced to give a yes or anything like that. No coercion. A safe-ask culture, it's safe to ask and it's safe to be asked. It's also safe to say no. So I know that I didn't experience that growing up. And once I started to realize that you can demand you can set standards for the people around you and how they interact with you, I found that my circle went from people who disrespected me, people who didn't know how to receive a question nicely, to nothing but people who want the best for me and nothing but people who want to collaborate and things like that. So that's what I would call a safe ask culture. And that's what my meetup is all about. In writing the book, I discovered a very simple concept, which was safe ask culture versus guess culture. And a guess culture, you would be afraid to ask, basically. You would try to guess or anticipate someone's response before asking, because it's not always safe to ask. And when it's not always safe to ask, you try and figure out, okay, what is their mood today? Or will they probably say yes to this? Because if they'll probably say yes, I'll risk it. That's the opposite of a safe ask culture. That's a punish ask culture. And that's another topic that we'll get into in the upcoming weeks. So I want to kick this off by just starting by getting everyone to type into the chat. And I realize we don't have a lot of people here, so we could just do this with a mic if you want, Drew or Dee. Just give me your name, throw it in the chat, and give me, like, think back to an argument or misunderstanding from last week and throw in to the chat an example of some healthy communication around that, an example of some unhealthy communication around that. And I'll give you guys like 2 minutes or so to just think about that, throw something in the chat. A healthy communication and an unhealthy communication. No worries, Drew. I know that feeling actually. Okay. Well, I guess I can throw out some too. Um, Last week I had an issue where I, let's see, I had a friend. That wasn't an argument. Let me get a better one. Hmm. Yeah. So an example of an unhealthy communication for me. I had a friend uh, right out of the gate basically accuse me of abandoning them at a party, which was not the case. They happened to be uh, they happened to not remember me asking them if they would wanted to ride home or if they wanted to stay. Um, but they didn't remember that the next morning, and they came out right out of the gate with, "How could you leave me at that party?" Um, they don't remember the conversation, so that would be unhealthy. Is the idea of somebody just blaming like that or making accusations right out of the gate, like no good morning. It was, why did you do this to me? Specifically because I didn't. I had a conversation with them before I left, and it turns out they were too tipsy to remember. Um, Example of a healthy communication, uh, I put a boundary on that person around their drinking and said, I'm not comfortable giving you rides to parties anymore, and I'm just not going to do that anymore. So that's an example of a healthy communication versus a unhealthy communication. The second one being, I set a boundary. Let's see. D says, a healthy. My friend asked for a check-in. That's definitely healthy when someone rather than rather than like yelling at somebody or jumping all over them or whatever, um, asking, "Hey, would you like a check-in? Can we have a check-in?" That sort of a thing is really close to "Is now a good time to talk," which is a phrase that I ended up identifying in my book after some. I had another friend actually recommend it to me 10, 10, 8 years ago, and in doing so, it blew my mind. Like, you can do that. You can ask someone if it's now's a good time instead of just surprising them with something. So yeah, asking for a check-in is a great healthy communication. And as an unhealthy, my wife asked me how I was feeling and then got mad. I'm guessing that's mad when I told her. I definitely feel you on that one. I know what it's like to be hesitant to share thoughts and feelings and finally do it and have the other person immediately get reactive and in ways where they're either telling you you shouldn't feel that way or they're somehow telling you your feelings don't matter or they jump right into how their side of things without even acknowledging you. Like, all of that is unhealthy communication, simply just not acknowledging someone's feelings. So those are a couple, there's some examples there. So my question here is, what made the healthy items healthy and what made the unhealthy items unhealthy? So when I say healthy communication, what do I mean? When I say unhealthy communication, what do I mean? And it's kind of surprising that this tripped me up. I spent weeks on specifically this because it should be so obvious, shouldn't it? Right? Like, healthy communication, obviously everyone wants healthy communication, but in reality, most people do unhealthy communication because it's not clearly defined. So I took a moment to really get to the bottom of that. And I'm going to read you a couple of vocabulary words or definitions from that I'm using in my book. And I just want to be clear, like, these are not like industry terms or scientific terms or something off of Wikipedia. These are the terms that I am using for my life, this book, and for my program. So communication. Communication is a collection of all the actions a person takes to get what they want and all the actions they use to interpret the other person's behavior. These actions and behaviors may or may not be conscious or unconscious. So when I say communication, what I mean is everything. Words, body language, everything the person does consciously and unconsciously to communicate. And they're trying to communicate what's in their head. 9 times out of 10, it's their wants and their needs. Healthy communication is all of that, right? It's all that communication. Healthy communication is any communication that adds to the long-term trust and goodwill of the relationship. Okay. So it strengthens the relationship. Because we had this disagreement, because we had this misunderstanding, on the other side of it, we communicated with healthy communication. And by the end, you know what? This whole experience has strengthened our relationship. That is healthy communication. And it's something that what happens now, but it's also in the future. So when we have this conversation that's maybe difficult, maybe has some heightened emotions, in doing that, we are strengthening our relationship today, but we're also planting seeds for the future. And the next misunderstanding or conversation that we need to have is way more likely to have. Like we're way more likely to do it, and we're way more likely to get it right again. So healthy communication is any communication that strengthens the long-term, what I say, trust and goodwill of a relationship. Now, unhealthy communication would be the opposite. Unhealthy communication is any communication that damages the long-term trust and goodwill of the relationship. And what's interesting about that is that sometimes we're so caught up in wanting to just either get our way or get through this real quick and get back to work or whatever, that sometimes we will chip away at the trust and the goodwill in the relationship today to get what we want. Like, like if you ever like are frustrated and having a bad day and someone's talking next to you and you just kind of turn at them and you snap at them, can't you just be quiet? Like right there, that just chipped away at the trust and goodwill in the relationship. It did it today and it's going to affect long term. So unhealthy communication is anything that damages the relationship. Healthy communication is communication that strengthens the relationship. And that is what I'm going to operate under all of my presentations, all of my talks in the upcoming weeks, all of my coaching is all based on that definition. A tricky thing, though, is that unhealthy communication very easily becomes abusive behavior. And there's a fine line there. And again, it took me a while to really tune in on what that fine line was. But unhealthy communication becomes abusive behavior when we are punishing the other person somehow. And I've got an example on that. So here we go. Common abusive behaviors would include intimidation, terrorizing, harassment, manipulation, physical harm, humiliation, ostracification, that would be kicking people out of groups, or any other action that is meant to hurt someone mentally, physically, emotionally, socially, or financially. All of that would be abusive behavior. And on top of that, the threat of those things, the threat of those punishment behaviors is also abusive behavior. So the definition of abusive behavior that I'm going to operate, abusive communication is any communication that damages the other person in an attempt to get what the abuser wants. And it also damages the relationship. So the difference between unhealthy communication and abusive communication is that unhealthy communication damages the relationship. Abuse is an attempt to damage the person and also damages the relationship. With that said, I would like to, I jumped a little. With that said, this is our first tool. This is what I want to share for today's lesson, basically. A clear distinction for what we want from our communication is possible. We can actually make a distinction between healthy and unhealthy communication. Not everybody knows that. I didn't know that. Once we realize that, we start realizing we have a choice of how we communicate. We can choose to communicate in healthy ways, and we can choose to start finding better ways. We will identify our unhealthy ways and start choosing better ways. We can also choose to not communicate with people who are using unhealthy communication on us or abusive communication on us. So the first tool is an awareness. It's an awareness that we can look for what we want in communication, and we have a choice that we can make and choose healthy communications, both for us and from the other person. So here's another chance to type in the chat. Again, think of something from last week, some misunderstanding or some argument. And with this new definition of healthy and unhealthy communication, give an example of a healthy interaction or communication that you had, or give an example of a healthy and an unhealthy. So I'll give you a couple minutes for that. Okay, I'm going to read D's. D says healthy, setting a boundary. That's great communication. I have to. Boundaries are a topic so big that there are books dedicated to just that one topic. I cover that as 2 chapters, I think, in my book. And I only want to caution that, yes, setting a boundary is a healthy thing. However, we have to be very careful about the words we use when setting that boundary and the ways that we enforce that boundary. Because although the practice of setting a boundary is very healthy, all the words can come out totally wrong, totally unhealthy. And just it, a lot of times people will get to a point where they set a boundary when they've been pushed too far. And when they've been pushed too far, they're emotional, they're freaking out, they've been bottling up, and they go to set that boundary and they are just a jerk, complete jerk. And they end up unhealthy communication, right? Setting a boundary, healthy. The way you set it may or may not be healthy. So, and that's part of the practice of this book, by the way. So, but I'm glad you called out boundaries. Boundaries are so important with all of this. They're intertwined. Like the reason why there's 4 main sections to this book, which like emotions, safe space, having the conversation, how you follow up with it. Like there's a lot going on, and boundaries are kind of intertwined through a lot of it. Like the first 3, like understanding your emotions and your needs, boundaries are all in there. Understanding how to create a safe space, boundaries are all in there. And then having the conversation, boundaries are all in there. So yeah, boundaries are super important. So thank you for bringing that up. Let's see. Dee also said unhealthy, yelling, ultimatums, and talking over. And yeah, those are really great ones. Like yelling, I think, is the easiest, most obvious unhealthy form of communication. Talking over is another great one. It really is a great one because what happens when people talk over each other is that the volume starts to go up. Because every time someone talks over someone, they raise volume usually, or if they cut someone off. And that is a great example of unhealthy boundary. It is going to ruin the long-term trust and goodwill in the relationship. If you're going to talk over me, then why am I even trying? Is something that you can ultimately get to. Ultimatums, that's actually really good distinction there. Like sometimes boundaries can come across as ultimatums, and that's a case where a boundary could be an unhealthy communication. So, and ultimatums are, how do I say this? With a boundary, you are describing how you are going to behave in specific situations. It has nothing to do with the other person. You're just letting the other person know. So, for example, I don't let people yell at me. So the boundary would be, hold on, slow down, time out. I don't allow people to yell at me. If I'm going to ask you to lower your voice, take a breath. We could take a minute and come back. But if you're going to yell, I'm going to have to leave. And that's just the way I am with everyone. It has nothing to do with you, right? That is a boundary. I don't allow people to yell at me. It's not, hey, you don't yell at me. It's not, hey, you lower your voice. It's the opposite. It's I don't allow people to yell at me. It's an agreement I made with myself. So that would be a healthy boundary. With an ultimatum, it would be, if you don't stop yelling, I'm going to do this. And it's less of a letting you know this is how I operate and more of a you better obey my rules and trying to get other people to change based on your comfort. That would be more of an ultimatum. Attacking or taking things away, taking yourself away, all of that could be an ultimatum. So yeah, those are great unhealthy ones. Let me see my time check real quick. Yeah, let's see. Can I throw out one or two? So okay, so for healthy, I'm going to throw out the phrase, is now a good time to talk? That's a healthy communication. Uh, I had somebody actually check in with me this last week. Hey, it's now a good time to talk. And it brought a tear to my eye because I think they learned it from me. And I was touched that they would even ask, is now a good time to talk? And I was like, give me 5 minutes to finish what I'm doing and you'll have me for the next half hour. And that's another example of a healthy communication where it's like, okay, I can't, but I can tell you when I will, and I will block out this time for you. So instead of just saying no, you say what you can do, and that's a form of healthy communication, or healthy negotiation is another way to say that. I keep looking at Dee's response. Let's see, an unhealthy communication. We were talking about yelling. Oh, I wanted to mention yelling makes me think of this. I learned about 3 years ago that I have a tone. I don't yell. I purposely, consciously, when my emotions are high or the situation is tense, I purposely don't yell. I try to control my voice and my volume. And instead, what I thought I was doing, I thought I was being gentle and direct. Instead, the feedback that I'm getting is that a lot of people being, say, 5 people who have literally confirmed this for me, I have a tone. And a tone to them is just like yelling. Like they get a feeling from me like, oh, dad's mad and dad could go off at any minute. Like that kind of a feeling because I'm holding my level down, my volume down. I'm trying so hard to not be upset and mad and yell, but I come out with a totally different thing that completely gives away, hey, I'm really upset, you know. So a tone is just as bad as yelling, is what I've learned from that, from my circle of interactions, basically. Uh, so I'm going to move on a little bit. So now's a moment where we could put someone in the hot seat. And the hot seat is basically an opportunity to just get a little coaching. I'm going to ask you to just let me know, do you have any aha moments or takeaways from what we've talked about so far? And then I'm going to ask you, is there anything you might do differently? And that's it. That's what's going to be in the hot seat today. So Dee or Drew, if you would like to be in the hot seat, you can either unmute and talk, or we could go through chat if that makes you feel comfortable, or we don't have to put anyone in the hot seat today. But it's an opportunity for free coaching if anybody's interested. So Dee or Drew, would you be interested in some hot seat coaching today? Okay. All right, no worries. Let's just move on. How about we're reaching the end of this lesson. How about typing into the Zoom chat regarding today, regarding everything we just talked about so far? Do you have any aha moments or takeaways? And is there anything you might do differently? And I'll think about mine for a minute. Okay. He says an aha moment, the tone thing, which I can't tell you how big of an aha moment that was for me. Like the day someone really got it through my thick skull, I I nearly cried and I like apologized to this person so profusely because there was someone that I loved. And I had like all of these conversations just wish through my head from the past where I realized, oh my God, that's why everything was going wrong. I was trying to have a calm conversation with somebody and it was just like nothing I could say was working. And it was like, oh my God, I had a tone and I might as well have been yelling. And yeah, I totally, the tone thing, Drew, or D, yeah. Um, different boundaries, different. Oh, you mean, oh, wait, anything you might do differently. Okay, different boundaries, not ultimatums. Yes. Um, don't be too hard on yourself with that on the grounds that boundaries are a lot. Um, and we're going to go in depth about how to make them and share them and execute them correctly, and have them not be ultimatums. Um, I would just giving you just a little bit of caution. Don't be too hard on yourself. Making boundaries and not ultimatums is actually kind of a hard thing to do. So be gentle with yourself. Drew says, Nothing yet, but I take some time to consider. Okay. A few days from now, I'll probably have an answer. That's totally fine. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you for your upfrontness and your honesty. I appreciate that. Um, let's see. One of my takeaways actually was everything that I just explained to Dee. The whole boundaries versus ultimatums thing. Um, I knew that, and I think I may have written lines of text in the book that actually talk about that, but not so distinctly. Not like, here's a boundary, here's an ultimatum. Look at what's the difference. It clearly they are the opposite ends of the spectrum. So that's an aha moment for me. And one thing I might do differently is actually I think I've got a little bulletin board by my front door where I put in things that I'm practicing, and I think I might throw up there, check your tone, because I haven't really thought about that in a while, and I think it's something that's worth bringing to the front for me personally. Cool. So up next, and this goes really good with what Drew just said. Up next, I'd like to challenge you. I'd like to challenge you in the upcoming week. Be aware. Be aware of communications and how they can strengthen or damage our relationship. Be aware when you're speaking. Be aware when other people are speaking. Be aware when two friends are speaking to each other, friends, coworkers, family members. When they are speaking to each other, it is way easier to get detached and observe communication. It's much harder to do it when you're involved in it. But I challenge you to be aware. And if you really want to challenge your thinking, uh, write down one or two healthy or unhealthy communications that you experience each day in the upcoming week. Just like we did today here in this video, sorry, not this video, in this Zoom call, um, give yourself a chance to write something down. And at the end of the week, you'll have a list. And what you're going to learn is you're going to give yourself a personalized view of communication for where you see healthy and unhealthy and where you see potential for yourself to improve. Um, yeah. And if you bring this personalized list to next week's meeting, and we'll continue with that. Um, and then I'm just going to throw in a little bit here at the end. I do coaching. I focus on those aha moments. I focus on those little opportunities of growth, and I focus on personalizing exactly your situation, not my situation, and not what not what the book says. I focus on how do we find out where you're at, what's your journey, and what's your next step, and let's figure out how we can take it together. I do small group coaching and I do one-on-one coaching. Small group coaching, this meeting is actually an example. This is purposely free. I'm purposely putting people in the hot seat so that we can talk about things. We can find those aha moments. We can get a little bit of coaching. And in a small group, I cap it at 8, usually 6. Basically, you get a chance to be in the hot seat, but you also get a chance to see other people in the hot seat and learn from their experiences. And for some of us, I know it might be some anxiety around being in the hot seat, which is why I call it the hot seat. And if you have that anxiety, small group coaching can be good because then you don't have to be in the hot seat. You could watch everyone else and learn from them until you're comfortable putting yourself in that position. With one-on-one coaching, the first session is always free. And the first session is usually finding what our dynamic is going to be like and whether or not we're a match. Because not everybody is coachable, right? And and I am not everybody's coach. Sometimes it's just our personalities aren't ready. So the first one-on-one coaching session is always free coaching, and then a talk about, okay, are we a match? Is this something that is going to be beneficial? I don't want to coach people who don't want to grow. So if I feel like the person I'm talking to is not interested in growth, and is not interested in practicing or trying new things, then we might not be a match. And if for any reason they maybe feel, I don't know, maybe my tone, it's a good example, right? Maybe my tone is not quite right for them, then they also have the chance to just walk away. So, so yeah, contact me if you'd like to do some free coaching. Um, in next week, we're going to start talking about emotional self-mastery. Specifically, what are emotions? How do they hit us? Where's all this blame come from? And it's a big topic. I'm gonna break it into pieces all through October. If you want to dash ahead with this sort of topics, you could always go ahead and find the book. The book is on Amazon. Again, it is called Is Now a Good Time to Talk? How to Ask for What You Want and Get It by Danny Burble. And my email is dannyburble@gmail.com. My site is dannyburblegods.com. And I'll be honest, at the moment, it's not totally set up for this specific endeavor. It should be by the next meeting. Are there any questions? Dee, Drew, is there anything you'd like to throw my way or anything you want me to clarify? Also, was this helpful? I'm very, very open to feedback. So if you wanted to chat, put anything in the chat. If you wanted to text me an email or contact me on meetup.com or whatever, I'm always open for feedback. I'm not seeing any chat and I'm not seeing any message that anyone's typing. So I'm going to say thank you both for coming out, and I hope to hear from you in the future. And I hope you have a great week challenging yourself to notice healthy and unhealthy communications. So I'll see you guys next time. All right. Thank you, Drew.